So let's start with an Indian proverb. You know, proverbs are a discreet way of passing a message. Yeah? So the clever people will always understand the message. The river of history, like the river of life, does not flow in a straight line. It bends and twists, eroding the old banks and creating new ones. It curves, it bends, it destroys old banks and creates new river banks, right? So this simple truth is the starting point for understanding a complex idea. So the man by the name Professor Wei, he has a YouTube channel by the name Predictive History. He talks about slow, dramatic events that follow to a social or a society's downfall. He understands it and he places it step by step, right? So every society collapses, and when society collapses, another one comes up, right? So this man lives in America. He's giving a perspective, right? He's giving a truth on the decline of the American society. I want us to dive into this video. He discusses the fall of American society. I want us to listen to him. I shall get back by the end of the video, of course, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
So let's discuss societies, why they rise and why they decline. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world in decline. So there are lots of signs that the world is in decline. What are these signs? Shout out some signs. Wars. Yeah, very good, okay? So you have conflict and wars. You look at the situation in Ukraine, look at the situation in the Middle East. But also, you may have seen the news and you have seen conflicts arising in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Myanmar. Also, Trump is about to send US troops to Mexico and Venezuela. Okay, so we live in a world of conflict. And that tells us that the world is in decline. What are some other signs?
Environmental issues.
Good, yes. So you have climate change. Okay, we are putting too much pressure on the environment, so the air, the water, the land is becoming much more toxic. Okay, good. What else? Good, yes. Unemployment is going up. But not only that, but people's attitude towards work is declining. We live in an age when people don't take work that seriously. People are not as enthusiastic. They're not as motivated to work hard as before. And we call this in China the Bailan age, right? The age of Bailan, meaning let it rot. Like, who cares? Don't take things too seriously. In America, the term is called quiet quitting. Okay, you pretend to work, but you're not really working. What are some other signs? So also you have lower birth rate. And this is a very important sign, right? Because if you think about it, if young people refuse to get married and have babies, eventually the world is going to die off, right? So this is actually a very important sign that the world is in decline. And we're seeing this happen throughout the entire world in all societies. The only exception is Israel and Georgia, but these are very small, rare cases. For most societies, there's rapid decline in birth rate. What are some other signs? Okay, you see a lower standard of living. Okay, and all this means is that inflation, right? So people make less money and they can afford less. Prices go up, but people's wages go down. So that's another sign of decline. Okay? What are some other signs? Okay, you also see higher stress, right? Higher stress, people feel more anxious, people feel more depressed, people feel more stressed. Emotionally, they feel drained. Okay, what else? Okay, people are less optimistic, right? Okay, greater pessimism. Okay, also, and this is really important, is the idea of debt, right? Both public and private. There are lots of governments around the world that are facing a fiscal crisis. A fiscal crisis just means that they spend more than they take in tax revenue. There are many families in China, in the United States, throughout the world that are heavily in debt. Okay, so debt is a huge issue for the world today. Also, lower cohesion and trust. And what this means is that people no longer trust each other as they did before. Society is less cohesive. If you walk on the street and you see a man on the street bleeding or hurt, you're less likely to help him. Okay, and this is very true not only in China, but also elsewhere as well. So lower trust issues. What are some other signs?
Disease.
Okay, greater disease, yeah. Okay, increase in disease. People are less healthy than before. People are more stressed than before. People are less optimistic. So we can go on and on and on because the signs of rapid social decline are too many. Now, these are signs of decline. Well, if we look at rise, then obviously it's the opposite, right? Yeah. People are much more willing to trust each other. Rather than going into debt, people will save money. People are healthier. People are much more optimistic. People are having lots and lots of babies, right? People are employed. Okay? So these are all signs that society is in decline. The rise, it's the opposite. Also, another sign of decline that's very important that doesn't really happen in China, but happens in the Western world is immigration. Okay? Immigration. Immigration is a huge issue in the Western world, and we will discuss immigration in future classes. But immigration is a sign of decline because it reduces cohesion. Okay? And it also reduces the standard of living. Okay? Another sign of decline is also housing prices go up. So people can no longer afford to buy a house. This is true in China. Young people can no longer afford to buy a house, but it's also true throughout the world. Okay? It's really hard for young people to get by. Okay? All right. Also, fiscal crisis. Right? We talked about this. But the idea of fiscal crisis is the government cannot afford a lot of public expenditures. In the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, pension will be a huge problem for governments. Okay? So these are all signs of rapid decline. All right, now having done this, what I'm going to do now is go over some theories as to why this is happening. Why is the world in decline? Okay? And there are lots and lots of theories, but I will present 3 theories to you that I think are interesting. Okay? The first is the idea of financialization. And this theory is proposed by by an economist, a French economist named Thomas Piketty. Piketty, okay? And he wrote a book called Capital in the 21st century. It is a fantastic book. You don't have to read the book, but if you have a chance, you should definitely pick it up because it is a very easy but very illuminating read. And what he argues is that what happens in society is that capitalism transitions from phase to phase to phase. In the beginning, you have consumer capitalism, meaning that what the society is trying to do is create goods that consumers want to buy. This is an era of rapid wealth generation. Then you move into financial capitalism, which is a period of investment. Rather than build factories, you put the money into the stock market. Okay? So you're trying to generate as much money as possible. But what we discussed last class that's very important is wealth and money are not the same thing. So in the first phase, consumer capitalism, you focus on the generation of wealth. In financial capitalism, you focus on the generation of money. And then you move on to monopoly capitalism, which is where just a few companies control everything. And we live in an era of monopoly capitalism. And this happens because it is much more profitable for companies to be monopolies than to be in competition with each other. Financial capitalism is looking to create as much money as possible, not as much wealth. And so a few companies come to dominate, become monopolies. And that's the age we live in today. Okay? Now, why is this important? It's important because when we make this transition, people are no longer focused on working hard. They're only focused on speculating. All right? So let me give you an example. Let's just say I'm an entrepreneur and I want to make as much money as possible. Well, what I do is I build a factory. When I build a factory, I'm creating real wealth because a factory requires you to hire workers. It requires you to build technology. It requires you to build goods that people want to buy. But after I build a factory and I make a lot of money, I want to take this money and let it grow as fast as possible so I put it in a stock market. Okay? And that's just how people behave. The problem is that if too many people do that, then no one's really working. No one's creating real wealth in the economy. The other problem is that because of the way capitalism is set up, if everyone's putting the money in the stock market grows too fast. And the real economy does not grow that fast, okay? And the difference is stark. Thomas Piketty spent a lot of time going over income tax, just looking at how much tax people paid. He did a lot of statistical analysis. And what he discovered is the real economy in late-stage capitalism will grow about 2%. The financial economy will grow at 5%. Okay? And this is really key. What this is telling us is that if you have $1 million, you could choose to go and open a restaurant, or you could choose to invest in the stock market. If you open a restaurant, you will make at most $20,000 a year. But if you were to put in the stock market, you would make $50,000 a year. So everyone's going to put all the money in the stock market, which allows for the stock market to increase. But the real economy is not improving. And therefore, you have all these issues arise. Greater unemployment, greater debt. No one's really working. Okay? So that's the idea of financialization. And what Piketty argues is that this is just a natural cycle. This is just a natural byproduct of capitalism. We live in an age of late stage capitalism. Is this clear to you guys? Any questions before I move on to the second theory? All right, let's move on to the second theory called elite overproduction. And this was proposed by a historian named Peter Turchin. And Peter Turchin spent decades looking at why societies rise and fall. He looked at the Roman Empire. He looked at the French Revolution. He looked at many different examples. And what he believed is societies fall, decline, collapse because of the idea of elite overproduction, meaning you have too many powerful people competing for limited positions of power. All right? So to understand this, I'm going to talk about another experiment called rat utopia. And rat utopia was a series of experiments conducted by an American scientist named James B. Calhoun. And what James Calhoun was trying to do in his experiments was try to figure out what living in a world of abundance and wealth and security meant. After World War II, the world was divided between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was the Cold War. But it was also a time of increasing abundance due to technology and peace. And the population was increasing. So James Calhoun conducted these experiments to figure out what this meant for the world. So what he did was this. He had a room, okay, that was sealed off from the world. And in the room, he put in food and water and housing for a colony of rats. Maybe like 10 rats at first, but they quickly became 400, 500 rats. And at first, the rats were really happy. But no matter how Calhoun configured the experiment, ultimately, the rats always ended up killing each other. Okay? So what he discovered is, if you live in a world of abundance and security, the end result is the rats always kill each other. And he kept on doing this for 20 years. And he could never, ever create a situation in which the rats lived peacefully. And he could never figure out why this was the case. And even today, there's a huge debate as to why this is the case. But he had a theory, okay? And the theory is this. The rats were not competing for food. They were really competing for status. All right. So let's think about this, okay? In a state of nature, in the real world, rats compete each other for mating rights, right? So you see a beautiful rat and you fight over her, right? The rat who wins out is now the alpha male. And the alpha male can have as many female companions as he wants. Okay? And what do the other rats do? In nature, what will the other rats do?
Fight against him.
Well, the other rats will probably run away, go somewhere else, and find other female companions, right? Because everyone's trying to be the alpha male. But what's the problem with James Calhoun's experiment? Why do they fight each other?
Because they can't be the alpha male.
There's no place for them to go. They're stuck where they are. You understand? So status is what we call a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. Okay? There can only be one winner. But in nature, if I win, then the other rats run away and try to build their own colony. But in James Calhoun's experiment, there's no place for them to go. And so all that happens is they keep on fighting each other until they die. Okay? And that's the idea of elite overproduction. And that's what Peter Turchin says. The elite, the children of the elite, are always fighting for positions of power. Not normal people, it's the children of the elite. But eventually, the elite have too many children, and there are not enough positions of power. Okay? Another way of saying this is that in China today, there are too many graduates of Peking University, Beida, and Tsinghua University, Tsinghua, right? They want to be the big boss. They want to have the power, but there's too many of them. Okay? There's no place for them to go. And that leads to conflict in society. And ultimately, what Peter Turchin has discovered is, if that's the case, then elite overproduction will ultimately lead to either war or revolution. It will lead to the collapse of society. And there's no way around this. Okay? That's Peter Turchin. Now I want to go to the third theory. And the third theory is the idea of a civilizational life cycle. And this is proposed by a German philosopher, scholar named Oswald Spengler. And what he argues is that society, culture, civilization, it's no different from a person. As a person, as a human being, we go through a life cycle. We are born, we grow up, we mature, then we die. Right? And there's no way around this. We all have limited life cycles. You can live to 100, you can live to 150, but eventually you'll die. And what also Spengler says is that happens in society as well. And there's nothing anyone can do about this. So let's go over the life cycle for civilization, okay? In the beginning, you are in the village. Then you move to the town. Then you move to the city. Then you develop the megacity. Okay? Not all civilizations will go through the cycle, but the successful ones will go through the cycle. Okay? You start off, so the Romans, right? The Qing dynasty. You start off in a village, then if you're successful in the village, you build a town, then when you're in a town and you're successful, you defeat other towns and you build a city, and you become a megacity. Okay? And what Oswald Spengler says is, at the height of the civilization must now die. Okay? So let's go over the theory. Well, in the village, life is pretty simple. People work hard. Okay? They are united. They have a collective mentality. Everyone's helping each other. And also, what's really important is lots of babies, right? It's very common for mothers to give birth to 10, 11 kids in a village, right? And the reason why is kids are free labor. So you're incentivized to have as many children as possible. Okay, so this is the framework of a village. But as you go up the civilization ladder, as you mature as a civilization, what happens is you have increased abstraction. Abstraction is just a fancy word for you're removed from reality. Okay? So when you're in a village, you understand everything, right? You understand, oh, the food that I eat comes from the seeds I implant, right? But when you're in a city, guess what? Those drinks you're drinking, you have no idea where it comes from, right? The food you're eating, you have no idea where it comes from. It's all abstract to you. It's all removed from reality, okay? So in the village, people are engaged in working hard and in helping each other. But as you move up, people become much more individualistic. Right? You're concerned about your own personal pleasure. You're concerned about how do I derive benefit from this? Okay? So another way of saying this is, in a village, what keeps people together are emotions and tradition and relationships. But when you move to a megacity, what is it that holds people together? It's money. Right? Money is the greatest abstraction. The problem with money is that it means we don't have to ever trust each other. In a village, if you get sick, everyone comes and helps you, right? But in the city, if you get sick, you go to the hospital and pay the doctor. Your neighbors don't have to care. Your family doesn't have to help you. Okay? So you become individualized. You become atomized. Okay? And in this megacity, what happens is, because you are concerned only about your own individual pleasure, you don't work hard anymore. In fact, what you want to do is you want immigrants to work for you, right? You no longer care about other people. All you care about is yourself. And guess what, guys? You don't want to have any children. Okay? And that's why the megacity represents the death of civilization. And what is Beijing? What is Shanghai? What is Washington, D.C.? What is New York? What is Paris? What is London? They're all megacities. Okay? And that's why we have these trends. And what Oswald Spengler says is, there's nothing anyone can do about this. It is a natural life cycle. All right? So these are the three major theories I want you guys to remember. Okay? Sorry, can you give the microphone? Yeah, can you just speak to the microphone?
But what if there is a universal target that forces everyone needs to work together? You know, will that work out to like everyone just put down all of these problems and figure out that?
Yeah, okay, I understand. That is a great question, okay? So the question, to rephrase it, okay, is, yeah, but what if there's an external threat, okay? An external threat. If there's an external threat, then surely this system, this life cycle, can be extended, right? And external threats are examples of, hey, let's say there's an alien invasion. Let's just say China's being attacked by the United States, right? And unfortunately, the answer is, it does not matter. Because once you've reached the point of a megacity, first of all, you're so selfish, you're self-absorbed, you are not aware of external threats. The other issue is, you're no longer capable of working together because you don't trust each other. Okay? So the external threats factor doesn't really matter. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking, okay? Yes, in theory, oh my God, if aliens come, then humans would unite. No, that's not what would happen, okay? What would happen is certain factions of humans would try to align with the aliens to conquer everyone else. All right? All right. So having gone through these three theories, what I'm going to do is combine them together to create a comprehensive, holistic, broad theory of why societies rise and fall. Okay? All right. And the problem with theories is they are simplistic and inaccurate and imprecise. So I warn you that this theory has limitations. But for our purposes, what we want to do is have a working framework. And then when we apply this framework to concrete examples, we can better refine this framework, okay? All right, so I warn you that this framework, there are a lot of problems with it, but it is a useful tool for us to analyze society in the past. Okay? All right, so I'm going to make generalizations about how society is structured. So at the core of society, the very powerful people, these are certain families. Okay? These are the founding families of this nation. And there's not that many of them, maybe 10, maybe 100, okay? But at most 100. So if you go back to the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire controlled most of Europe, as well as Anatolia, Egypt. It was a huge area, but really there were only about 200 families that controlled the Roman Empire, okay? All right, so how these families express power, how they control power in society is through three mechanisms, okay? Three pillars of power. And these three pillars are finance. Okay? Finance, we talked about last class, it's just central banking. All right? Second pillar is religion. Religion is just what people believe, how to control what people believe. Now, the religion of today is science and technology. Okay? And the third pillar is intelligence or spies. All right? Now, for the purpose of, to save time, I'm not going to go too deeply into intelligence and religion, but I will in future classes, okay? I just need you to remember that there are three pillars of power at the core of society: finance, intelligence, and religion. And it's their nexus, their combination that allows the elite to control everyone else, okay? So from this nexus, they will control all aspects of society, including schools, including the military, including government, including the media, including culture, including crime, the mafia. Okay? Every aspect of society that you can imagine is being controlled in some respect by this nexus of power. Okay? Also, you have like corporations, right? And then at the outer edge are the people. Okay? The people, because they're so massive, the massive people, they're the ones who generate wealth for society. So this system is designed to create as much energy as possible through the people. Okay? Energy. Because the harder the people work, the more wealth is generated in society. All right? So a metaphor that we can use is this. Think of society as a corporation. The people are the workers, right? They're the ones who do the real work. The elite, these families, are the owners. And these people in between, the middle class, are the managers. Okay? So again, this is a very simple metaphor, and it's not accurate, but it's useful for analysis. Okay? So the families are the owners of the corporation, the people are the workers, the people in between, the managers, are the managers. And we call these people the middle class. There have been other names for it in China before in history. We call them the scholar officials, right? Another name for them is something called the professional managerial class, PMC. Also, another name for them is the petty bourgeoisie. Okay? Again, you don't need to know these names. For the purpose of simplicity, we will just call them the middle class. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. So having gone through the structure of society, let's talk about what happens when society rises and falls. Okay? When it rises, the dynamic of these three groups, it's very interesting. When it rises, the families who own the nation are happy to let the managers control society. And this is what we call democracy, right? And the managers are always providing feedback to the families and saying, we should treat workers better. If we treat workers better, then they will work harder. Okay? And at this point, things are great. The people feel that they have a voice in the system, they're making good money, everyone's really happy. But what happens because of the elite overproduction is these families produce too many children who want positions of power. Basically, they want to spend money from the corporation. And now the corporation is in trouble. It's in debt. Okay? So at this point, what happens is this. You would think the managers would say to the families, listen guys, we need to be more fair to the people. But what really happens in reality is the managers exploit the people. Okay? The managers will now deceive. They will lie to the people. They will commit fraud. They will exploit the people. Why? The reason why is this. What the managers really do is something called rent-seeking behavior. Okay? Rent-seeking behavior just means they have a certain power that they want to exploit in order to extract wealth from other people. So for example, the most classic example is you own an apartment in Beijing, right? So you rent it out to someone who needs to live in Beijing and you collect rent. Well, this is true for a lot of people. So if you are a lawyer, you collect rent because only you can work in the court system. So if you want to sue someone, or if you have a contract dispute, you have to go to a lawyer, okay? The lawyer is collecting rent. And that's what the middle class, the professional managerial class do. They are rent seekers, okay? Another way of saying this is, guys, if you go to a company, you know what the workers do, right? You know what the managers do? They really don't do that much, okay? And this is true for the middle class. Like, the managers, the middle class, live very nice lives. And so when the company's in trouble, the managers are like, well, I have a very nice life, I have a very nice job, but I don't really don't do anything, so I'll probably be the first to get fired. So they have to show their worth. They have to prove their worth, and therefore, they exploit the workers. Okay? Do you understand? They push the workers harder to generate more wealth. All right? So in the decline phase, this is not really a problem. But what happens over time is the conflict within the elite gets worse and worse. Elite overproduction. And what will eventually happen is they will form into factions that compete against each other for power. Okay? And when that happens, then society becomes aligned into factions. The factions will bring in certain elements of the middle class, which will then bring in certain elements of the people. And now, what will happen is civil war or revolution. And this marks the collapse of society. What's really important for us to remember is this is a natural cycle, and no amount of external threat will change that dynamic. Why? Because it's very common for these factions to align with mercenaries. Okay? So there's foreign invasions, not because some guy overseas is like, oh, this society is unstable, I'll come and invade. What happens often is a certain faction invites mercenaries into the nation as part of the power struggle. And then the mercenaries realize, you know what? We can stick this for ourselves. All right? So when you reach the collapse phase, the society is much too insular, much too wrapped with infighting to care about external threats. And that's why, if there's an alien invasion, it really wouldn't change anything. Okay? All right? Is this clear to you guys? Yes. So again, this is the model we're working with to explain the rise and fall of societies. At first, in this system, the elite families are willing to let the managerial class incentivize and motivate the workers to do their best. And you do that through democracy, through openness, through meritocracy, through innovation. But over time, as these elite families have more and more children, and these children are engaged in rent-seeking behavior, they basically want to steal profits from the corporation. The corporation runs into trouble, and the managers are forced to coerce the people, which leads to greater conflict. And eventually, over time, the collapse happens when society breaks up into different factions, which leads to civil war or revolution or war. Okay, so that's a model we're working with. All right, any questions? Are you guys clear about this? Yeah.
On what if they just like don't have that much children?
Excuse me, what's the question?
Like, what if the elite families don't have that much children? Will this model still works?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. So what if families don't have that many children? Okay, that's a really interesting question. And the answer is, these families, first and foremost, want to have as many children as possible, right? Because how do you pass on your power? So maybe the middle class don't want to have that many children, but the elite will have a lot of children because they need to be able to pass on their power and privilege to their children. In fact, the elite is first and foremost concerned with passing on their privilege to the next generation. Okay? And that's why these elite families expand so fast. And also, who wants to marry into elite families? Who wants to marry into them? Everyone. All right? And they have to marry into other families in order to maintain their power. Okay? So having children in a marriage is a way for the elite to maintain their power. Okay? But that's a good question. Any more questions before I continue?
Now, after carefully listening to Professor Wei, here is my deep critical analysis. As I promised, Professor Wei's speech is not just about a country or a single event. It is about a model, a way of seeing history. He explains that a society is like a building. For a long time, it seems strong and stable, but underneath, the foundation can be slowly cracking. He says that this process has three main parts: the problem with the elites, the problem with the common people, and the final breaking point, right? So the elites, the common people, and the final breaking point. From afar, we can see a society is shining. A society is called the dream place. A society is called the American dream, or a society is called any other country's dream, right? But underneath, it is collapsing, it is rotting, right? So according to the professor, we have the elites with the normal citizens and the final collapse of the country. He first discusses the problems of the elites. The professor's first point was that a society's problem often begin at the very top, with the people who have the most power, wealth, and influence. He called this elite overproduction. This is a simple idea. Imagine a school where every student wants to be a star quarterback, but there are only a few spots on the team. Over time, there are more and more people who are trained to be leaders, business owners, politicians, but not enough top jobs for them to have the power. When this happens, Professor Wei tells us, these well-educated, ambitious people become unhappy. They start to feel like the system is rigged against them. Instead of working together to help society, they begin to fight with others for the few top spots. They use their skills to attack the system from the inside, often by criticizing the leaders who are already in power. This creates a lot of anger and division, and it makes the society less able to deal with real problems. The professor also talked about what he called unjust enrichment. This means that the elites at the top starts to get very, very, very rich, while the rest of the people struggle, struggle, and struggle. They use their power to change their rules in their favor, right? They make it easier to get rich if you're already rich and harder if you are not. This is like a game of Monopoly, where the person with the most money can change the rules so that other players have to give them more money every time they go. This creates a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and it makes the common people lose faith in the idea that the system is fair. Right? That was the elites. The second part he dissects is the breakdown of the common people. The second part of Professor's model is what happens to the rest of the society. He says that a healthy society has a lot of trust, right? People trust their neighbors, people trust their government, and they trust that if they work hard, they're gonna get somewhere ahead. But when the problems with the elites start to show, that trust begins to disappear. The common people look up and see the elites fighting each other and getting richer and richer while they get poorer and poorer. They feel like no one in power cares about them. This feeling of being left behind creates a deep sense of anger and frustration. As trust breaks down, people stop seeing themselves as one big group. They start to separate into smaller, angry and angrier groups. They blame each other for each of their problems. People who are unhappy with their lives find new leaders who promise to fight for them, often by telling them that their problems are caused by someone else, right? Another group of people or a different political party. This makes the society very fragile. It is like a house where the walls are no longer connected. A small push can make the whole building fall apart, right? Now the third part, or rather the third segment that the professor talks about is the breaking point, or rather the final tipping point. In his last words was that all these problems, the greedy elites, the angry common people, the lack of trust can exist for a long time. But, he adds, at some point, something small happens that pushes everything over the edge. It might be war, a natural disaster, or a bad economic time. Whatever it is, the society is too weak to handle it. The small crack in the foundation that was always there suddenly breaks wide open. This is the point where the institutions, the government, the courts stop working. People no longer believe in them. The old rules no longer matter. And that is when a society fully collapses. The professor said, this doesn't mean the people all die or the country disappears. It means the old way of life is gone forever and something new, often chaotic and violent, takes its place, right? So, how does this apply to my audience? How does this apply to the Black Americans? Now, we are going to use this framework by the professor to understand the history and the present situation of Black Americans in USA. We will see that for Black Americans, the story of Black collapse is not just a future threat, but a past and present society. I call it a cyclic event. It's a cyclic event, something that exists in all three dimensions of time: past, present, and future. To start, we'll have to say this: a history of systemic collapse. Now we are going to break down the cyclic formation or the cyclic mechanism of how a society collapses. The professor's ideas about collapse can be applied to the Black American experience in a unique way. From the moment the first slaves were brought to America, The very idea of their society was built on a collapsed foundation. The system of slavery did not just harm them, right? It was a total social and cultural collapse. It destroyed their families, their tradition, their languages, and their sense of self-worth. Now, after slavery ended, the Jim Crow era was another form of collapse. You see? It was a time when the legal system itself, one of the main institutions of society, worked against black people. The police, the courts, and the government were not there to protect them, but to oppress them. This created a profound and lasting loss of trust. The rules of society were not applied fairly. For many black Americans, the very idea of a shared fair society has always been a myth. In chapter 5, the modern elite and the black America, right? Professor Wei's point, or rather the professor points out the elite overproduction, where we have so many people on the top, or people who have studied for the top, but few slots on the top. So it's like a divide, it's like a scramble, it's like a fight, right? Organisms were too many, the food was small. So the strongest organisms are the ones which survived, right? So the professor discusses again the problem of elite overproduction. This can be seen in the lack of true representation of black Americans at the top of society. While there are more black people in positions of power today than ever before, CEOs, politicians, famous athletes, they still represent a very small fraction of the true elite. The professor's framework would say that even with these successes, the system as a whole does not allow for a fair share of power. You see, this creates a feeling of frustration, not just for the few who make it, but for the millions who did not. The success of a few can sometimes hide the fact that the system is still creating unjust enrichment for those at the top, and that the gap between the rich and the poor is wider than ever. This gap disproportionately affects black Americans who still face systemic barriers to building wealth and gaining power. This continuous unfairness makes it very hard to believe in the American system, which is now the society. You see? Another thing is the breakdown of social cohesion. The social togetherness is broken. A society can't collapse if its people are together. The people, first of all, has to be separated. And who separates society best? Which president has separated society best? Other than Trump, we don't have any. If you have any other president who has done what Trump has done, please share your thoughts in the comment section. I'd really love to hear what you have to say. Now, the professor points out about the breakdown of trust, which is especially true for black Americans. For centuries, they have seen how institutions like the police, the courts, and the government have failed them. Stories of police brutality, unfair prison sentences, and a lack of economic opportunity are not just headlines. They are part of a lived experience for many. This constant sense of betrayal erodes trust. It makes it very difficult for many black Americans to believe in the idea of a shared society when their own experience is one of constant struggle and unfairness. The professor's model would say that this is the kind of deep internal fracture that makes a society vulnerable to more problems when a large part of the population does not believe in the system. That system is already collapsing, right? So we also have the era of Trumpism. as the next thing. So, if we connect the era of Trumpism, making America great again, the Republicans, the ideologies, if you connect all those Republican philosophy ideas to their philosophy and the ideas to the political movement of Trumpism, you see, the professor's framework gives another way, or rather gives a way to see this is not a cause of America's problem, but a symptom of a society that was already far along the path of collapse. So the professor asks us, do you think Trump is the one causing the collapse of America? Or Trump is just someone who finds himself in a moving train of collapse, right? It's a question that the professor is asking. What do you think? I'd really love to know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comment section. See, the professor's speech would suggest that the rise of Trumpism was not a surprise. It was a predictable outcome of the cracks that were already in the foundation of American history. The professor's idea of angry, unhappy people who feel like the system is rigged against them is a perfect description of people who are drawn to Trump's message. You see, he spoke to their anger and frustration. He told them that their problems were not their fault, but the fault of the elites and the system. He did not try to fix the system from the inside. He promised to tear it down and rebuild it. This message was so powerful because it tapped into the deep lack of trust that the professor said is a key part of societal collapse, right? Trumpism did not create this feeling. It gave it a voice, right? So Trump knew what to say, how to say, and to what people to tell it to. That's why people are really voting for him, even though they knew who he was from Trump version 1. He showed us who he was at first, but because he told us messages that were itchy to our ears, we overlooked some red flags. So Trumpism has weaponized this discontent, which is now leading to a collapse, right? He has weaponized this discontent, the anger from the common people, right? And the greed from the elites. He has tapped into that, and now he has energized it and turned it against everyone. You see, the professor's model says that when trust breaks down, people break into groups. Trumpism took this to a new level. It used the internet and social media to weaponize this discontent. It created a constant flow of information that reinforced people's fear and anger. It told them that their group was a good and other groups were bad. It told them that they couldn't trust the news, the government, or even their own neighbors, right? This is the opposite of a healthy society. A healthy society works because people can have different ideas but still agree on a basic set of facts. Trumpism, however, made it so that different groups lived in different realities. This is a powerful and a dangerous form of social fragmentation. And it's a classic sign of the breakdown that the professor has described. You see? And now there's an intersection of the Black Americans and Trumpism, making America great again. Remember, we have some black people who voted in Trump. Yeah? They took part in voting in Trump, which now led and is leading to a society collapse, the society of America. You see, the professor's idea became most powerful when we see how they connect these two seemingly separate issues, Black Americans and Trump. For black people, the collapse that professor describes has been a constant part of their history. The feeling of being betrayed by institutions, the fight for a fair share of power, and the breakdown of trust are not new. They are old and painful realities. Trumpism in this context is not a new enemy. It is a new symptom of an old disease. It is a political movement that either ignores the struggles of Black Americans or actively works against them. By creating more division, by weakening the institutions that are supposed to protect everyone, it makes the ongoing collapse for Black Americans even worse. It is a movement that says we have our own problems and your problems are not important. Listen, Black people, your problems are not important. We have our own problems, right? See, the professor's speech helps us to understand why this happens. When society is on the brink of collapse, the people who are suffering the most will often be the last to be heard. The elites are too busy fighting each other, and the common people are too busy fighting with other groups. The problem for all of Black America, which are the clearest signs of the deep cracks in the foundation, are often pushed to the side. Yes. Now, to conclude on all this, in the end, the professor's speech on societal collapse was not just about the past. It was about a way of looking at the world by taking his ideas, the professor's ones. We can see that the problems we face in America today, the anger, the division, the lack of trust, are not random. They are the natural results of a system that has been slowly breaking for a long time. For Black Americans, this is not a new information. They have lived through collapse and struggle for centuries. But Professor Way's framework helps us see their experience is not separate from the rest of the countries. It is in fact the most important warning sign, right? The rise of Trumpism is not the cause of our problems or the cause of American problems, but the result. It is what happens when a society is so divided and so full of distrust that it is willing to follow a leader who promises to tear it all down. The professor's speech has a warning. It tells us that if we do not find a way to fix the cracks in our foundation, the entire building will one day fall, and for some, of course, that collapse has already begun. Now look at the farmers, look at the truckers, look at those white people who are homeless, look at the Latinos who are being deported, the Cubans, the Hispanics. These people voted for Trump because they didn't like their neighbors. You see, the elites, what are they doing? They're fighting the government. The common people busy fighting one group, Black people against Latinos, Latinos against Mexicans, or people busy fighting one another. While the system collapses, you see, there is no stability in Trumpism. They ain't. So Trumpism is not Trumpism is not a cause. It is an effect. Right? Trumpism is not a cause, it is an effect. Yes. Guys, I hope that you find value in what I do, and if you find value, kindly subscribe. See you in the next one. Stay positive. Support me on Patreon. Donate something if you have. I'll surely appreciate. See you in the next one.